Welcome. My name is Alex, and I'm your host of the Corporate Cowboys Podcast. Welcome to Season 7, where it gets heavier, it gets deeper. We go deeper into the corporate war. This is a corporate world order, if you did not know. So, the next couple episodes here will be me reading to you a book. This audiobook that I'm narrating is from the book The Naked Corporation: How the Age of Transparency Will Revolutionize Business. And this joint is written by Don Tapscott and David Ticoll from the publishing house The Free Press. Ooh. Published in 2002, so it is a little old, it's dated, but it's always funny. It's always funny to go back and see how sometimes these folks can't predict the future and how it's been twisted to how it currently is today. 2002 was a pretty tumultuous time. There was not so much a recession, so to speak, but there was an economic downturn. There were a couple of scandals. If you were awake, if you were alive and awake in that time, not woke, if you were awake in that time, you witnessed a lot of BS, a lot of could be taking place on the news, in the news as far as economic and financial times. Socio-political, I mean, we've kind of always been in wars, and that's just life. Until you get high up enough to make a change, the military industry kind of does its own thing. And that's worldwide. That's every developed and developing nation. They've got their hands in a lot of pies, so to speak. So, the next couple of episodes, bear with me as I read to you The Naked Corporation. If you have any comments, any questions, by all means, you can send them to us. You can follow us on Instagram. That's at Corporate Cowboys with a Z at the end. And these episodes will also be on the Patreon. You can join us to keep this operation nonprofit or for free, at least for you, because this is an educational podcast. It's therapeutic for me. It's cathartic for most. So to keep it free, shoot us a couple dollars. You know what I'm saying? I'm not selling you nothing, but you are supporting the cause. And those funds go towards office supplies, guns, bullets, legal fees, and business expenses. Take care. I love you. Remember that. I do this out of love only. Thank you for joining me, Alex, your host, on another episode of the Corporate Cowboys Podcast. The next couple of episodes will be an audiobook narrated by yours truly, with commentary intermittently so as to not disrupt the flow too much of the reading, if you will. This book is The Naked Corporation: How the Age of Transparency Will Revolutionize Business. The authors, Don Tapscott and David Ticoll. Just to give you a quick overview of the contents. There are the acknowledgments and the introduction. The acknowledgments I won't read, the introduction I will. Part 1, there is the transparency imperative, and under those there are subparts: The Naked Corporation. 2, transparency versus opacity, the battle, it's called. 3, the open enterprise. Under part 2, when stakeholders can see, there are 5 subparts. That's subpart 4, whistleblowers and other employees. Subpart 5, transparency among business partners. 6, customers in a transparent world. 7, communities. 8, the owners of the firm. Part 3, being open. There's 2 subparts. That's 9, harnessing the power. 10, breaching the crisis of leadership. And then there are notes and an index at the end. So let's start with the intro. An old force with power is rising in business, one that has far-reaching implications for most everyone. Nascent for half a century, this force has quietly gained momentum through the last decade. It is now triggering profound changes across the corporate world. Firms that embrace this force and harness its power will thrive. Those which ignore or oppose it will suffer. That force is transparency. This is far more than the obligation to disclose basic financial information. People and institutions that interact with firms are gaining unprecedented access to all sorts of information about corporate behavior, operations, and performance. Armed with new tools to find information about matters that affect their interests, stakeholders now scrutinize the firm as never before, inform others, and organize collective responses. The corporation is becoming naked. Customers can evaluate the worth of products and services at levels not possible before. Employees share formally secret information about corporate strategy, management, and challenges. To collaborate effectively, companies and their business partners have no choice but to share intimate knowledge with one another. Powerful institutional investors today own and manage most wealth, and they are developing X ray vision. Finally, in a world of instant communications, whistleblowers, inquisitive media, and Googling, citizens and communities routinely put firms under the microscope. Corporations have no choice but to rethink their values and behaviors for the better. If you're going to be naked, you'd better be buff. This conclusion may seem at odds with current thinking about corporate values and behavior. At the end of 2003, the corporate world was still weathering a crisis of trust on a scale unseen since the Wall Street crash of 1929. Many say this latest crisis proves that companies are worse than before, are worse than ever, sorry, and irredeemably so. For these critics, the corporate corpus isn't buff, it's obese. We believe the opposite is true. To build trusting relationships and succeed in a transparent economy, growing numbers of firms in all parts of the globe now behave more responsibly than ever. Disgraced firms represent the old model, a dying breed. Business integrity is on the rise, not just for legal or purely ethical reasons, but because it makes economic sense. Firms that exhibit ethical values, openness, and candor have discovered that they can better compete and profit. Some figured this out recently, while others have understood it for generations. Today's winners increasingly undress for success. That's body positivity for you, motherfucker. Opacity is still alive and kicking. I'm just continuing. In some situations, it remains desirable and necessary. Trade secrets and personal data, for example, are properly kept confidential. And no, I don't care if it's data or data. Use it as you will. Sometimes openness is expensive, but more often, opacity. That means opacity is, I don't know if it's like the adverb or I think it's the adverb of opaque. Opaque is an adjective, something you cannot see through. It's the opposite of transparency. All right, continuing. Trade secrets and personal data, for example, are properly kept confidential. Sometimes openness is expensive, like data breaches. But more often, opacity only masks deeper problems. Armies of corporate lawyers fight openness as part of a good day's work. Old cultures, the insular model of yesterday's firm, die hard. Old cultures die hard. Nevertheless, the technological, economic, and socio-political drivers of an open business world will prevail. Corporations that are open perform better. Transparency is a new form of power, which pays off when harnessed. Rather than to be feared, transparency is becoming central to business success. Rather than to be unwillingly stripped, smart firms are choosing to be open. Over time, what we call, quote, open enterprises, those are firms that operate with candor, integrity, and engagement, are most likely to survive and thrive. This is good news for all of us, customers, employees, partners, shareholders, and citizens, no matter what stakeholder hats we wear, because corporations have become so central to our lives and communities. Most of us are shareholders, whether directly or through pension and mutual funds. Our retirements hinge on corporate success. Because they own shares in companies they work for, workers now think twice about going on strike. Societies have willingly made way for corporations and capitalists to innovate and create wealth around the world. Yet, we worry when firms become untamed global powerhouses, and we wonder why economic divides have worsened. We love brands and new products, but we are uneasy about the companies behind them. Firms mine vast amounts of information about us to build one to one relationships, but we fear the loss of our privacy. We seek out lower prices, but despair when our jobs move offshore to low cost geographies. We prize our communities and Main Street, yet flock to Walmart. Damn, damn, that shit's heavy. That shit is heavy. Notice how they implicate corporations and capitalists, right? There's a fucking difference between corporatists and capitalists. Me, myself, I'm capitalist till I motherfucking die. It's capitalism till I'm in the ground 6 feet under. But one could argue I'm also a corporatist. I'm just infiltrating, exfiltrating. I'm in and out. I rub, not shoulders, but elbows. I like working with corporate. Don't work for corporate. Don't work under corporate. You have to learn to value yourself. That's what being a corporate cowboy is all about. And it's true. I mean, a lot of folks, well, you've seen it lately. A lot of folks sacrifice security. No, a lot of folks sacrifice, what is it, freedom, liberty, for the sense of security. A lot of folks sacrifice privacy for the sense of convenience. I mean, it's the best marketing scheme. I mean, when you've gone through the motions of learning to operate within corporate, you recognize a marketing campaign when you see one. Having folks sacrifice their privacy, having folks compromise on their values for a sense that they are being benefited, when in actuality they're being taken advantage of. That's when you fuck it. I'll keep pushing. I'm not going to make this political. Business has become the most controversial institution in society. Business leaders who just yesterday were revered are today mocked and reviled. There is widespread outrage regarding the 8 and 9-figure incomes of executives who preside over the destruction of shareholder wealth. The integrity of the accounting industry, the sector responsible for ensuring the financial honesty of corporations, has been undermined. For all demographic groups, public trust in CEOs is now only slightly higher than that of used car dealers. Young people are particularly uneasy about corporate behavior. You know why young people are particularly uneasy? It's not that they're uneasy, it's that they're fucking naive, that they're fucking innocent. It's that they've been born into the corporate world and yet don't recognize it, and yet don't know that they are in corporate. Their parents maybe for lack of knowledge, they perish for lack of knowledge. That shit's written somewhere in some holy scripture, right? Their parents might have created a sort of bubble around their offspring that protected them from a quote unquote corporate war, corporate lifestyle. And so when these young people don't know, don't recognize what they are looking at, don't recognize the world they live in, they're uneasy. They're uneasy. You fear what you don't know. Simple as that. Stakeholders have historically unprecedented opportunities to focus these anxieties and scrutinize the corporate world. They have new power to influence performance and even cripple companies almost overnight. What will they do with this new influence, and how should firms operate in the face of it? We have been investigating the impacts of information technology and new media on business and society since the early 1980s. Transparency is one key piece of this puzzle, yet there are virtually no books or articles about it. The few authors who have addressed transparency tend to treat it merely as the disclosure of financial information to shareholders or the prevention of bribery. With this book, we have attempted to develop a theory, a body of knowledge, and set of leadership practices for transparency. We explain how and why transparency has moved to center stage, including its bumpy rise through the history of industrial capitalism. You will meet new concepts like forced transparency, active transparency, reverse transparency, stakeholder webs, transparency fatigue, values dissonance, the transparency divide, and what we call the new business integrity. You will read how opaque firms that lacked integrity were devastated and, in some cases, reborn. I would imagine with transparency. You will also learn how open enterprises thrive and succeed through candor and ethical core values. Among our conclusions are: point, transparency and corporate values enhance market value. There is a competitive business case for strategies that focus on stakeholders and sustainability. Good firms that optimize the needs of all stakeholders are more likely to be good for investors. Wow, that's a no fucking duh. No way. Second point, transparency has an organizational form which we call the stakeholder web. That's in quotes. A network of stakeholders who scrutinize a firm whether it knows it or not. Oblivious to their stakeholder webs, some firms have been devastated or destroyed. Yeah, it's when you eat, everybody eats with you, right? When you come up, you got to bring your team up with you, right? I don't know how this is how this is some grand finding, a discovery. If you follow the Corporate Cowboys podcast, you know that a lot of street values, if they are properly translated into corporate values, equals corporate success, right? It's don't fuck over who you do business with. And that's it. And that's it. Don't fuck over who you do business with, right? I mean, when business gets too personal, business gets bloody. And I don't know how that's a fucking discovery. Okay, third point. Employees of an open enterprise have greater trust in one another and their employer. No way. And it says here, resulting in lower costs, improved quality, better innovation, and loyalty. Wow. Fourth point. Transparency also brings a power shift to employees who share more information than ever before. Okay. Yeah, I would say so, yes. When you become, what's the term called? I guess if we're talking about webs, if you become the most valuable node in a web, right? If you've got your hands on more information than most, on more information than everybody around you, and you share it freely, you're able to leverage a lot more influence than someone else who doesn't give a fuck about dealing with knowledge. Point five. Is it five? One, two, three, four, five. Transparency is critical to business partnerships, lowering transaction costs between firms and enabling collaborative commerce. The invisible hand of the market is changing the way firms orchestrate capabilities to create differentiated products and services. Six, another power shift from corporations to customers has emerged since no, sorry, has emerged from price wars and quote accountability wars. Corporate values are now central to many hands. Keep in mind, just a side note, yeah, keep in mind that this book is a little dated, right? It's from the early 2000s. It's from the early 2000s. So the information here may be a little dated. I don't think they predicted what the effect of social media would be like because corporations still have the power. Corporations can just throw something online on social media in front of you, pretty much create your reality and what you should believe. And you ain't got too much power you don't have too much power to flex and seeing through the facade and seeing through the smoke and mirrors. It's become a little more difficult than customers until they wake the fuck up and realize that they are corporate cowboys in the making. They're knee deep in a corporate fucking war, and they get hands on. They do a little dirt themselves. 7, and the last point: corporations that align their values with those of the communities they touch and behave accordingly can develop sustainable business models. No fucking way. You're telling me that if a corporation touches down in a community, profits off of the community, and then reinvests those profits in the community, that is self-sustainability? No fucking way. All right. Enough jokes. The best firms have clear leadership practices that others can adopt. They understand that investments in good governance and transparency deliver significant payoffs. You got engaged relationships, better quality and cost management, more innovation, and improved overall business performance. They build transparency and integrity into their business strategy, products and services, brand and reputation, technology plans, and corporate character. We hope this book will help managers who are striving to build effective firms in the new business environment. We also hope the book helps employees, customers, partners, neighbors, and shareholders understand the changing role of the firm in society, how to hold corporations accountable for the benefit of everyone, and how to work and live while wearing many hats. For additional cases, information, readings, and discussion, join us at www.nakedcorporation.com. That is the end of our introduction. I'm going to read right through part 1, subpart 1. That's part 1, the transparency imperative. This is chapter 1. Chapter 1 is the naked corporation. The 2002 trust crisis was arguably the worst on Wall Street since the 1929 market crash and the depression of the 1930s. Enron, WorldCom, Arthur Andersen, Xerox, Ticoll, Citibank, JP Morgan, Credit Suisse, First Boston, Tenet Healthcare, Jack Welch, Martha Stewart, we could go on. The response, Sarbanes-Oxley, new rules from the accounting standards boards, and an explosion in corporate governance reforms is the greatest leap in corporate transparency since Franklin Delano Roosevelt's securities laws of 1932. Meanwhile, business leaders rank near the bottom of surveys on public respect. Consumers are fickle. Loyalty between employers and employees is shaky to non-existent. Police and protesters clash at international meetings. International, like Trilateral, I think it's called, and Bilderberg. All those good folks. Litigation proliferates. I mean, litigation is abound. Folks are suing and launching claims, lawsuits at one another. Terrorism and war justify secrecy, breaches of privacy, and covert acts. Whoa. Hold on. Are we talking corporate or are we talking government? Are we talking corporate or government? What's going on here? When there is a crisis in trust, transparency seems wanting. The openness of our society, its firms and other institutions, always fragile, is tested. Yet the fact is, growing, not declining, transparency was a prime cause of the 2002 crisis. Leaders see transparency as a threat or an opportunity. Some fight it or hide from it. Others believe they will do better for shareholders when they openly align their business with the interests of stakeholders, sorting out trade-offs along the way. Increasingly, in the face of transparency and legitimate expectations, small firms take the second path. I'll repeat that again. Small firms take the second path of transparency. Do well by doing good. It sounds simple, maybe too simple. Isn't that what preachers have been telling us for thousands of years? Why is this any truer today than yesterday? One reason: today's business environment depends on trust and mandates transparency like never before. As a little subpoint, what is Fidelity hiding? Fidelity is the company. Look it up. Chances are, if you live in the United States, you are a Fidelity investor, whether you like it or not. Fidelity is the world's largest mutual fund company and the nation's #1 provider of 401k retirement savings plans. In January 2003, it held $1.4 trillion in customer assets, of which it directly managed $760 billion. In September 2002, we decided to use the internet to check out what Fidelity Investments was doing on your behalf about the corporate governance crisis. We expected to find evidence the company was out there fighting the good fight, demanding that corporate boards clean up their acts on behalf of the millions of individual investors that it represents. Our first stop was Fidelity itself, where we found nothing on the topic in its collection of press releases. If the company was doing anything about the mess, it wasn't publicizing that fact, meaning that Fidelity was just fumbling the fucking bag. It was not being transparent. How about that? We searched elsewhere and quickly discovered, of all things, a trade union. In parentheses, that's the AFL-CIO campaign. A trade union campaign that charged Fidelity with betraying shareholder interests. It demanded that the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, force the firm to disclose how it votes the shares that it controls. Fidelity's response, according to the Wall Street Journal: disclosure wouldn't help its fund's returns and could harm the diplomacy it practiced with corporate executives with the goal of making companies more investor-friendly. The AFL-CIO noted that Fidelity partly through its management of 401k and other pension accounts of union members, had been a major shareholder of Enron, WorldCom, and other cases of corporate burnout. Fidelity, with its big voting power at such companies' annual meetings, was, quote, responsible in part for these companies' corporate governance, including decisions about executive compensation and conflicts of interest in corporate accounting oversight. It accused Fidelity and its peers of, quote, inherent conflicts of interest. Mutual fund companies are in business to sell lucrative 401k retirement plans and other financial services to the same corporate decision makers whose governance proposals they vote on. The AFL-CIO speculated that Fidelity had voted with management against corporate reform and shareholder interests at another half dozen troubled companies. It wondered whether the company had supported resolutions to move headquarters to Bermuda, where corporate taxes are low, in order to escape U.S. taxes at Accenture, Ingersoll Rand, Stanley Works, where Fidelity was the largest shareholder, and other firms. Quote, what is Fidelity hiding? Asked the union. Its campaign included media releases, information sessions for its members, and a demonstration outside Fidelity's Boston headquarters. Its website asked visitors to sign a letter to the SEC. An investment advisor has a fiduciary duty to vote the shares of its clients in a manner that is consistent with the best interest of its clients. Yeah, absolutely. Otherwise, that's a breach of duty, of loyalty, dog. All right. Anyways, continuing. Disclosure of individual proxy voting decisions is the only way that I can ensure that my mutual fund company is fulfilling its fiduciary duty to me. Requiring disclosure of individual proxy voting decisions by mutual funds will also promote accountability and transparency, two qualities sorely needed to restore investor confidence in our capital markets. And then you would sign at the bottom there. The appeal worked. In September 2002, the SEC amazed the AFL-CIO by saying that it would consider requiring I'll just consider it. It would consider requiring mutual funds to publicly disclose how they vote in corporate proxy contests. That's like during voting sessions. Fidelity led the fund industry's fight against the measure over several months, coming up with a cascade of reasons why transparency was a bad idea. First point, disclosure could affect the company's stock price. In parentheses, it says, better now than later, we say. Point two, we view how we vote as proprietary information. And then in parentheses, how is your vote on the choice of a director or a new share issue a proprietary secret, right? I mean, they're holding this voting power for their investor, for their client. So they ought to be voting in the interest of their client. How is that proprietary? If it's the client's, I guess. It's the client's proprietary information that's only been authorized for you to exercise. You can't withhold it from the client, though. The cost. Point three, the cost of disclosure would be too high. In parentheses, have you heard about the internet? All right. I mean, this is early 2000s. Have you heard about the internet? For reference, I'm reading this in 2022. This book is early 2000s, so, give you a little context. Point four, most shareholders don't care how fund managers vote. In parentheses, the ignorance is bliss gambit. Yeah, I mean, how cute. You're just going to accuse your clients of being fucking retarded and not caring how you vote their shares. That's nice. Nice touch. Then in January 2003, Edward Johnson III and John Brennan, the chairman and CEOs of Fidelity and its largest competitor, the Vanguard Group, co-signed an article in the Wall Street Journal saying that, quote, the proposal's unintended consequences could undermine the best interests of 95 million mutual fund shareholders in the US. Their main argument was that the disclosure would, quote, open mutual fund voting decisions to thinly veiled intimidation from activist groups whose agendas may have nothing to do with maximizing our clients' returns. A fund manager's focus belongs on investment management, not on becoming an arbiter of political and social disputes. End quote. Isn't that what you're doing by voting, though? If you're siding with management and management is out to screw over 401k plans, are you not siding with management? I mean, fucking come on. Come on. Okay. Despite despite such opposition, and with the support of two important Republican House Committee chairmen, that's Michael Oxley and Richard Baker, the SEC announced in December that it would proceed with the rule, effective in 2004. The CEOs of big private mutual funds refused to buckle under, continuing to refer to the SEC decision as a proposal. That's how you know when corporate starts flexing on regulatory agencies, you know shit's in trouble. When money starts talking because money talks, you know shit's in trouble. All right. The CEOs, they continue to refer to the SEC decision as a proposal. The industry took the unusual step of appealing to the U.S. government's Office of Management and Budget on the grounds of paperwork burden. Welcome to the world of the naked corporation, it says. Okay. This debate reveals many things about how the United States and the world are changing. First, it points to how the internet exposes Fidelity and every other company to public scrutiny like never before, day after day. Forced transparency. Pick any big brand, enter a search term or two in Google, and chances are you'll find someone to tell you what's wrong with its picture. A point here, Exxon. Exxon brings you to the Exxon Valdez oil spill trustee council site, featuring a jaunty crayon-colored headline, quotes, "Kids, are you doing a class report?" The up-to-date site reminds us that a U.S. government inquiry found the company responsible for the 1991 spill. It informs us, though Exxon has paid $1 billion in penalties, the economic and environmental cost was a multiple of this number, and that was over 10 years later. Most of the civil litigation remains unresolved. So 10 years later, I mean, now we're in 2022, so we're at least 20 years later. 2022, 30, damn near 30 years later, most of the civil litigation remains unresolved. I don't know what stage they're at in the civil litigation at the moment. I'm not keeping track of it, really. I know that Exxon fucked up. They did their best to Heisman that bitch and still ended up paying penalties. McDonald's, second point. McDonald's delivers McSpotlight, a London, UK-based site that grew out of the infamous McLibel case. When in 1997, the company won a Pyrrhic victory after a 2-year libel trial against its Greenpeace critics. Today, the site crows about the company's plans to close 175 restaurants, leavened with news about a partially built site in Grenoble that has just burned down. The police suspect arson. Its comments with barely disguised glee, along with the information that neighbors had earlier won a court order temporarily suspending construction. Such drops in the ocean of information are on permanent display easy to find or stumble on by accident. Transparency is being done to the firm, whether it likes it or not. No firm can safely protect any secret, particularly any that angers stakeholders. Increasingly, corporations are naked. Second, rather than suffer forced transparency from a trade union led campaign, Fidelity might have chosen a different route: active transparency. Several mutual fund managers and other institutional investors, such as, in parentheses here, such as Domini Social Investments and the $135 billion California Public Employees Retirement System, that's CalPERS, began disclosing their proxy votes via the web in 1999. So they actually did it preemptively. They got out ahead of the ball. But other union-based institutions like the Teachers Insurance and Annuity Association, College Retirement Equities Fund, that's TIAA-CREF, responded to the SEC proposal by saying that shareholders are better represented when votes remain confidential. God damn. Imagine the fucking marketing and PR you have to fucking launch, the spin you got to put on those words for your clients to say, yeah, no, it's fine. Vote how you fucking feel like and keep it confidential. I don't want to know how you vote for me. All right. After the SEC announced that it would proceed with the rule, TIAA-CREF dropped its objections. Okay, all right. Third, pension holders in the millions are not just shareholder type stakeholders. They are broader interests as employees, consumers, future retirees, and citizens. Sorry, they have broader interests. They have broader interests as employees, consumers, future retirees, and citizens. These diffuse interests give them at least a big stake in the well-being of the entire economy, their communities, and the natural environment, as in the profitability of any one company in their portfolio. Corporate governance reformer Robert Monk's comments that today's shareholder is a many-hatted stakeholder because the distinction between the interests of shareholders and other stakeholders is becoming irrelevant. Here's a little quote from Monk's. Many shareholders are the beneficiaries of defined benefit pension plans, people who will work, say, 18 more years and then retire. They want to retire into a clean, safe, civil world. So this is a world in which the interests of the environment, employment, and the community are essential to the functioning of the corporation. Once you identify who the owner is, not some arbitrager or computer trading program, but a guy with some 18 more years to work before retirement, you begin to see convergence between stakeholders and shareholders. When the AFL-CIO complains that Fidelity may have voted for the departure of Accenture's head office to Bermuda for tax evasion, it presumes to represent the broad self-interest of pension holders as taxpayers, in other words, as citizens and community members. This point of view creates dilemmas for any firm, Fidelity or not, that seeks to vote in the interest of the shareholders that it represents. Values are also part of the issue. Is there any way to align multiple interests with enhanced shareholder return? How do you decide what to do when interests conflict with returns? Finally, Fidelity and the AFL-CIO and the apparently competing interests that they represent are at the heart of structural changes in U.S. capitalism, changes which themselves are churning up the transparency wave. Retirement and pension funds own about 1/4 of the value of all shares in the United States. They are the largest block of institutional shareholders. In other words, through pension funds, ordinary employees own a big chunk of the shareholder economy. Also, 95 million Americans, half of the country's households, have invested personally in mutual funds, most with an eye on retirement. Yeah, obviously. I mean, you're going to retire. That's going to be your livelihood. That's going to become your quote unquote nest egg, potentially generational wealth. Obviously, that's the life cycle. You work, you retire. The AFL-CIO proposal cuts to the quick of corporate governance in this environment. How does this new breed of pension fund shareholders ensure that the CEOs and executives of the firms they own act in their interests? Up to 5 layers of governance can exist between a pension shareholder and the mass of employees of a company in which he or she ultimately owns shares. They are as follows: a pension manager who is responsible for the entire pension pool of a company or government employee group. Two, one of several investment firms like Fidelity that the pension manager hires for its expertise in buying and selling shares. Three, the board of directors of each invested company, which is the investment firm's primary official interface. Four, the CEO who reports to the board of directors. Five, the company's management group that reports to the CEO. These entities, singly and in combination, regularly encounter lucrative opportunities to place their own interests ahead of shareholder interests. Many executives view their owners as a mere abstraction to be manipulated rather than as real people to whom they owe duties of trust and can come through their office and break their fucking kneecaps. That was me adding that at the end. The AFL Fidelity conflict raises core issues that we address in this book. First point: what is the challenge of transparency and how are firms responding? Two, what kind of transparency will leading firms? What kind of transparency will leading firms actively provide to their stakeholders? Three, will transparency cause firms to change their values and behavior? Four, can firms do well by doing good? I don't know. Is that a yes or a no? And five, how will we know if this is happening? Okay. The Naked Corporation. This is like the next subtitle. The Naked Corporation. There was a time when firms managed to keep most things. The Naked Corporation. Didn't we just read that one subtitle like that? Hold up. Hold the phone. No, it's a subtitle within a subtitle. A lot of them are called The Naked Corporation, which I guess is repetitive, but it's the theme. Get used to it. The Naked Corporation. There was a time when firms managed to keep most things to themselves. Many did not even publish annual reports. They didn't even publish annual reports until the 1930s, when U.S. national legislation required them to do so. That was through the Securities Acts. Media and governments have always functioned as watchdogs on behalf of the firm's various constituencies. But increasingly, skeptical and self-powered stakeholders are taking matters into their own hands. Whether they like it or not, and whether they cooperate or not, firms face direct scrutiny and exposure from all manner of interests: employees, customers, shareholders, business partners, community members, and interest groups. Some firms have always argued that they are only accountable to their shareholders. Others, like Johnson & Johnson, with its 1940s era corporate credo, have for generations said that shareholders benefit as a result of meeting the legitimate expectations and needs of customers, distributors, suppliers, employees, and the local and global communities in which it operates. Johnson & Johnson has been shitting on the game for a long time. Johnson & Johnson, you got 3M. Who else is up there? Bayer, I guess, for the most part. But, I mean, half of those, if not most all of those companies at the very top have also been hit with corruption charges. So, I mean, don't suck their dick too hard. All right. We agree with the latter view the school of thought that says that the firm, in exchange of the many privileges, in exchange for the many privileges, benefits, and protections it obtains from all of these entities, has reciprocal obligations to them, and that its enduring success depends on achieving alignment among all these interests and the company's core mission. In doing so, a company has an obligation to minimize or pay for negative, quote, externalities. Those are the bad impacts on people or the environment that result from its activities. Yeah, that makes sense. If you go through, that's like the Exxon Valdez, or who was it? Was it Chevron or Shell? I think it was Shell, fucking up forests. I think it was in Brazil or some tropical country, and they didn't want to pay for soil remediation, right? But I mean, we're talking about poor indigenous areas where they don't have the resources to hire corporate cowboys and that sort, right? But yeah, it also has an obligation to treat these entities with reciprocity and accountability, seeking their counsel on how they expect their interests to be taken into account, and then meeting those commitments. In all these respects, the firm must identify and work with its legitimate stakeholders, the people and organizations who affect or are affected by the activities of the firm, if only that's the way the world ran, right? The reason to do this is neither obligation nor ethics. Rather, if the firm does these things right, it is more likely to prosper. Yes, and that's just on rapport. That's just building rapport. If you're selling something, you're selling it to the whole fucking community that you're operating out of. If you're a dope dealer, right? Like I said, we would refer this back, analogize this back to the street life. If you're a dope dealer selling out of a stash house, or maybe you wouldn't deal out of a stash house, right? Because that's where you keep the stash. But you're dealing out of a front, right? If you don't help maintain and upkeep and provide order in your activities from the top down so that the community doesn't become run down, then you're going to garner a bad reputation, right? But if you provide a semblance of order, if you actually bring peace and prosperity to the people around you, and not just fucking them senseless, right? Taking every penny from them and extorting them to their last drop of blood, you're much more likely to not get the cops called on you, to not get the feds on you. If anything, you could cut deals with all of them and shake hands, make money every way around, right? Because you would have a good reputation. You would be viewed as benevolent, if you will. The reason to do this is neither obligation nor ethics. Rather, if the firm does these things right, it is more likely to prosper. But today, in a world where trust is in deficit, the dialogue between firms and stakeholders is too often wanting. In response, stakeholders, all stakeholders, not just employees, business partners, and competitors, and consumers and shareholders, but ultimately society as a whole, sometimes through government, have seized the tools at their disposal to shed the bright lights of transparency on the corporation like never before. This is a many-sided crisis. Little subtitle, employees. Employees are the first to know. Thanks to email and instant messaging, every worker has an electronic printing press at his or her fingertips. It's uncanny how fast news and rumors spread across organizations. This process amplifies an atmosphere of growing mistrust and cynicism. Insecure employees can easily compare their pay packages to those of seemingly underperforming senior executives whose pay plans are publicly available on corporate proxy statements. Only 45% of workers had confidence in their senior management in early 2002. That's down from 50% 2 years earlier. Increasingly, employee-driven transparency is public. Roughneck websites like internalmemos.com routinely publish internal correspondence ranging from CEO missives to the resignation letters of individual employees. For color commentary, readers are referred to an affiliated site, fuckedcompany.com. Their discussion ranges from the banal to the highly analytical, most of it with a cynical twist. Fortune described Vault Inc. as, quote, the best place on the web to prepare for a job search. At its core, a matchmaker that competes with the likes of Monster.com, Vault attracts job seekers and potential job hoppers with up-to-date inside skinny on thousands of employers in a variety of industries. Visitors can purchase Vault's proprietary company reports, but for the real dirt, they join its electronic water cooler. That's quotes, electronic water cooler. I would imagine nowadays it's digital. Keep in mind that this is from the early 2000s, so shit, everything was electronic, and electronic was the buzzword. But today's day and age, it's digital, it's virtual, the virtual water cooler, right? For which Vault has nabbed the trademark. Wow, wants to fucking trademark the electronic water cooler, but I'm sure Vault's still around. I'll probably look into it later. Employees and job seekers congregate in its hundreds of company and issue-specific chat rooms to share news, and I suppose views because there's analysis, to share news, analysis, and advice. As with most such sites, some of the information is questionable, and savvy employees are encouraged to have their BS detectors engaged. An alleged Johannesburg-based McKinsey employee says, quote, any layoffs here too? Things here have been slower than slow, so I wouldn't be surprised. A chatter counsels a Cybele Systems job prospect. A chatter counsels a chatter? You mean a chat thread, I guess. A chat thread counsels a Cybele Systems job prospect with quotes, it's just a high-tech sweatshop. Do yourself a favor and pass on by. Type, quote, Walmart in Google, and you'll quickly uncover a tangle of exposés. Foremost is a union drive by the United Food and Commercial Workers, which provides a detailed critique of the company's pay policies, alleged mistreatment of injured workers, alleged sexual discrimination, and environmental and community impacts. Employees, especially those in large corporations, also scrutinize their bosses' commitment to social responsibility. The Corporate Social Responsibility Monitor 2002 survey by Environics International reports that 80% of U.S. large company employees say that social responsibility increases their motivation and loyalty, and 85% would participate in company-sponsored community programs. However, 58% say that their firm needs to focus more on being socially responsible. Just a side note, being socially responsible is just fucking lip service. A lot of these workers are also saying that they would participate, but if the company actually sponsored a program like this, even internally, they wouldn't do dick about it. So I've been in a position like that. I've actually put together programs and motherfuckers never signed up. Again, that goes back to the root of the problem. Maybe they get paid shit, so they don't have time to participate in programs because they have to pick up extra hours, work extra shifts, and so they don't want to devote their free time to some bullshit company program just to satisfy, just to what's the term called? Appease? Is it appease the corporation's ego? Just to stroke the corporation's ego. However, 58% say that their firm needs to focus much more on being socially responsible. Okay. Wherever you look, employees are looking back at the firm. Every action by its leaders is scrutinized, analyzed, and judged, and employees use the internet and other communications tools to reach shared conclusions that directly affect morale and productivity. No firm can afford to ignore this force. A little subtitle, Business Partners and Competitors. That's another set of stakeholders. Most companies and market participants are awash with information about customers, suppliers, channels, and competitors, industry practices, and market conditions. What once was considered top secret, such as product and technology trends, operational best practices, and company market performance, is now, more often than not, industry common knowledge, if not in the public domain. Trade publications, conferences, benchmarking collaboratives, professional job hopping, syndicated research, competitive intelligence consultants, job boards, patent records, mandated public reporting, online resources of all kinds, Wall Street analysts, and the better equipped than ever mass media ensure that strategic information is readily available. The challenge is to capture, analyze, and draw the right conclusions from this mountain of available data. Every industry depends on a common set of unique technologies. Retail depends on logistics. Pharmaceutical depends increasingly on bioinformatics. And all industries depend on information and communications technologies. But these specialized technologies evolve in a transparent world. Much advanced research is in the public domain, and most products can be reverse engineered. In such an environment, how do companies sustain competitive edge? Why would they desire more transparency? Answer: innovation is, as economists say, quote, path dependent. A company that already has strength in, for example, next generation breathable waterproof fabrics, e.g., Gore-Tex, enjoys a technological, manufacturing, brand, and infrastructure lead that only a handful of competitors can touch. Absent massive capital investment, a traditional cotton mill has no chance of joining the fray. Path dependence is painfully apparent in automotive, a technology-intensive industry beset with global excess capacity. After 25 years of reverse engineering Japanese design and production techniques, Detroit's Big Three are still having trouble producing a reliable, energy-efficient, and value-priced competitive vehicle. All the competitive intelligence in the world won't change their organizational genetics. In the networked global economy, firms increasingly function in networks. Okay, and what we call business webs or B webs. Yeah, nobody fucking calls them B webs. They're just networks. That's all. I mean, nowadays we treat businesses literally like if the corporation after what was it called after United United Citizens after Citizens United, if the corporation is a person, a legal person, they're just networks. They're just another node in the network. Shit, there could be one individual human being who is more valuable than all of these legal fictitious persons put together, right? I don't put one over the other. It ain't worth it. Even if the legal person is composed of many individual people, right? Because there could be many individual fucking dickheads, and they still won't be more valuable than one individual who's doing the right thing correctly. All right. Rather than attempt to do everything from design to components manufacturing, assembly, marketing, distribution, and customer service, firms are focusing on what they do best and relying on partners for the rest. Dog, this is economics 101. It's called having a comparative advantage. You want to specialize in the one thing that you do best and outsource the rest, right? Outsource the fucking rest. Outsource the outsource what is not as profitable to you. But again, you want to keep in mind of the negative externalities. If you're fucking over people to do it, it may be worthwhile to invest locally. You aren't so much biting the bullet as you are cultivating profitability locally, regionally, instead of sowing bad blood where you do business. You never want to have bad blood where you do business. That's bad for business. In radical, hold on. It says some automotive manufacturers have gone so far as to outsource the assembly of entire vehicles. No way. In radical business models like eBay and Amazon, the core company does very little. eBay essentially operates a web-based auction site where it's 28 million, this is again by 2002, where its 28 million active users handle all aspects of inventory, marketing, pricing, delivery, and trust creation for the goods that they sell and buy. Amazon runs a growing online retail mall where consumers and freelancers write most of the product reviews, and the products themselves are all sourced from third parties. There are no house brands here. The company itself focuses its software technology on physical fulfillment. In all these cases, clear, precise, trustworthy communication is the sine qua non of success. That is, without communication, you have no success. Within a business web, the most valuable information is often quite boring. Much of it has to do with knowing the specific demand signals that drive activity. How much will we sell tomorrow? And therefore, how much should we produce today? Will Albertsons put Crest on sale next week? Damn, Albertsons is a fucking throwback. Albertsons was like the progeny to fucking no, was the ancestor, I guess, at this point, because it's not the progeny anymore, is the ancestor of like Lucky's, I think. Yeah, Lucky's like bought out a lot of Albertsons, I believe. If not, it was Safeway. So before Safeway, before Nugget, before Lucky was motherfucking Albertsons. This has got to be a West Coast book, man. I do remember that. Put Crest on sale next week. I mean, Albertsons could have been nationwide too. I'm not reading too deep into it, but I do remember a time when I lived on the West Coast that I recall seeing the Albertsons, and I was a young cat then. In this arena, transparency is uneven. Often, the answers are simply not known. When they are, transparency depends on sharing specific information at the time and place of need, which neither the internet nor a market intelligence system can systematically drag out of an unwilling participant, right? I mean, for that, you need fucking corporate espionage, damn near. or some dedicated corporate cowboys who are on the ground level, where the employees know things first. Those motherfuckers are cross-trading, are cross-communicating and cross-pollinating and making business better, not just creating siloed organizations, siloed firms with the belief that the competition is opposition, right? It's not always the case. It's not always the case. Otherwise, competitors would never hire or would never poach. They would just be knocking motherfuckers down from the hierarchy. They would never poach. They would never poach. They would only kill. All right. Often the answers are simply not known. When they are, transparency depends on sharing specific information at the time and place of need, which neither the internet nor a market intelligence system can systematically drag out of an unwilling participant. Sometimes a buyer has the clout to demand information from suppliers. Other times, information is shared in an environment of mutual trust, though in the first two examples below, trust is often betrayed. But not enough to kill the system. Yeah, I mean, you can't kill the system. You can't kill what is capitalism. You can try to subvert it. You can try to regulate it. You can try to put a chokehold on the motherfucker. But as China has shown, as Japan has shown, as Asia has shown, Russia has shown, Germany, all that, folks who try to put a clamp down on innovation, sooner or later get innovated on. Sellers, the first point here. Sellers on eBay accept that buyers will publicly rate the quality of their goods and the attentiveness of their service. 2, genome researchers share insights and techniques, trusting that collaborators across academic and business boundaries will not sneak off and patent them. 3, Procter & Gamble, that's P&G, receives specific real-time performance results from every Walmart store so that it can replenish shelves as needed. Walmart lets P&G in on its store-by-store sales because it is confident that P&G won't give the information to Kmart. Dog, is Kmart still even in business? I don't know. I don't have one near me. And, and 4, competitors Celestica and Solectron give capacity production forecasts and costs to competitors Dell and IBM, which in turn share market demand signals with Celestica and Solectron. Celestica builds products to IBM's forecasts because it trusts that IBM will not stick it with the bill if demand fails to materialize. I would imagine that Celestica and Solectron are either microchips or processors. They probably manufacturers of some kind. As it turns out, many business partnerships are not very good at sharing information. Some of that has to do with a lack of certainty. Market demand can't be anticipated accurately enough. In other situations, the problems are more systemic. Buyers withhold information in order to maintain the upper hand with suppliers, or buyers fail to use the information they get. Dell's supply chain is optimized by producing single personal computers tailored to single end customer shipments. But a customer that wants 500 identical PCs every Monday over a 3-week period might get better service from Hewlett Packard, HP, which has more of a mass production supply chain model. Of course, Dell and HP will each accept business that is more appropriate for the other supply system, risking the trust of customers and suppliers. So motherfuckers would rather spread themselves too thin and drop the ball. That is, overpromise and underdeliver than to just fucking dial up the competition. They're not the opposition. Rather than dial up the competition and shoot them a little work, they'd rather fuck themselves, their clients, their employees, and their stakeholders over. That's fucking beautiful. That's called avarice, by the way. Avarice. Google that shit. Such conflicts are not sustainable. Celestica CEO Eugene Polistuk comments, quote, "Before companies guarded and filtered information. Now we're all naked. It's like the CNN of business. Instant availability. No room for bull. Transparency and networking squeeze out all the zero value added information, distortion, and ineffectual management. Neither authoritarianism nor cronyism can survive the market forces unleashed by transparency. Firms must manage to results with discipline and integrity." That's odd. That's odd of the CEO. The CEO is necessarily saying that authoritarianism, right? So past regimes, and cronyism, like just straight up corporatism, cannot beat pure capitalism. Can't. Capitalism is king. It's capitalism till I motherfucking die, right? And so firms must manage two results with discipline and integrity. Rule number 1 of business is don't fuck over the business. You take care of business and business takes care of you. You produce bad business and blood. You won't live long enough to spend that Dirty fucking blood money. Shareholders, the next category here. Shareholders. We are all shareholders now. In 2002, half of US households invested in stocks directly or through mutual funds. But we also may be employees, customers, and community impacted neighbors of a firm whose shares we own. In addition, institutions such as mutual and pension funds, not individuals, own 64% of publicly traded shares. Few people can name the companies that their mutual funds have invested in. In fact, many pension funds put half or more of their money into index funds. For example, one that follows the entire Standard & Poor's S&P 500 rather than a stock picker's selection. Ironically, among all the stakeholder groups that look on the corporation, shareholders, the owners of the firm, seem most poorly served and in the dark. I wonder why. It's because they don't have the location of the executive offices. That's why. I mean, I would love to send them a personalized letter, one that I know they'll receive and write back to me, that I could verify their physical address. The situation is paradoxical. On the one hand, and again, that commentary it's all satire. I'm just a lowly corporate cowboy, a low life taking the high road, if you will. On the one hand, the situation is paradoxical. On the one hand, the United States has been the world leader in corporate reporting for decades. The Securities and Exchange Commission requires massive depth and detail in quarterly and annual reports, as well as special filings of all sorts of material events, quote unquote material events. Yet, it is clear that the crisis of 2002 was a crisis of disclosure and transparency. Enron is a case in point. Its peak market capitalization was $90 billion. When Enron went bankrupt on December 2001, it was after a string of unanticipated, non-recurring charges and restatements of its corporate balance sheet, mostly due to improper reports of dealings with partnerships run by and to the personal benefit of company executives. Nevertheless, the case is strong that while Enron's management had intentionally misled the markets, enough information was available for canny investors to have seen trouble and dumped the stock. Market analysts were well aware that, quote, bodies were buried in off-balance sheet entities that were cryptically described in Enron's pre-crisis disclosure statements. And that's the end quote. I'll read that again because it has to do a lot with how you doctor statements, with how you put a spin on disclosures, how you identify and describe assets and liabilities on balance statements and financial reports. I'll read that one more time. Market analysts were well aware that, quote, bodies were buried in off-balance sheet entities that were cryptically described in Enron's pre-crisis disclosure documents, right? So because these are publicly disclosed, you could go back, and if you know what the fuck you're looking at and you know what the fuck you are looking for, you could have seen it coming, right? But it just so happens that this is not common knowledge. Like I said before, the majority of people do not fucking recognize that they are born into corporate, and yet somehow they grow old, are slapped in the fucking face upon retirement, and they come to realize that they are in corporate. Okay. Continuing, Arthur Andersen's conflict of interest was public knowledge. it was doing $25 million in consulting and tax planning while also functioning as Enron's auditor. This practice had already caused Anderson grief with other clients like Waste Management. Market analysts and investment managers in the heady dot-com bubble chose to ignore all this publicly available information and treated Enron as, quote, faith stock. It's a faith stock. You have faith in the stock, like the dollar, rather than as the lemon that it was. So much for the theory that markets efficiently take all available information into account when they price securities. What applied? What applied to Enron applied to many others, whether AOL, Nortel, or Yahoo. The market engaged in an irrational gold rush and, in many respects, no different from the US railway boom in the 1840s. But even in the midst of the madness of crowds, disclosure issues were real. Disclosure issues are real, and the shareholders have lost their patience. A couple of points. First point, few companies publish financial reports that the average investor can readily understand. You see, this is not common knowledge, and even less identify and interpret critical nuggets buried in footnotes. Yeah, that's like any academic scholar who fucks around with statistics, who has an agenda to push, whether it be social, cultural, financial, political. They hide bullshit. I mean, I guess they hide the bullshit in plain sight, right? So they hide the bullshit in plain sight, and what you should be paying attention to sometimes will be buried in the fine print, in the footnotes. If anything, there is too much information presented in a confusing manner. This is opacity in the guise of transparency. In the 2003 annual meeting of investment company Berkshire Hathaway, CEO Warren Buffett said, quote, if you can't understand a company's financial statement in 2 minutes, it means that management doesn't want you to, and that they are probably hiding something. Dog, are we talking corporations or the government here? Point 2, few investors other than insiders and the super sophisticated have time, focus, or capability to become fully informed. Even fewer have time to be active. Assiduously, yeah, I mispronounced that. Assiduously reading company reports, raising issues, and attending annual meetings. I'm going to do you all a favor and look up the term assiduously. I would imagine it's along the lines of diligently, closely. What is the definition of assiduously?
Here's the definition of assiduously: with great care and perseverance.
With great care and perseverance. I guess the difference between all the others is that you've got perseverance. You have to take great care for the details, and persevere through fucking mountains. Sometimes mountains, big stacks of financial reports to know what the fuck you're looking for in order to do a good job, a fine job of looking out for your own personal interests. When company management wants to hide the bullshit from you, you have to go out of your way. You have to go out of your way and persevere through smoke and mirrors to find what you're looking for. Point 3, stockbrokers combine conflict of interest, in parentheses here, they are typically rewarded for churning portfolios rather than increasing their value, with professional optimism. So stockbrokers combine conflict of interest with professional optimism. Point 4, as we described earlier in this chapter, shareholders are many layers removed from the people who control the companies they own. most mutual funds that represent them prefer to keep shareholders in the dark about their proxy votes and other activities. I mean, that one was more clear cut. The one before that about combining conflict of interest with professional optimism. I guess what they want to do is qualify optimism with the term professionalism, right? So a lot of these brokers will get a transaction fee, right? Just for trading. They don't even have to make you a profit. So just for trading. So what they will do is they will trade, make money off of your money, right? They will charge you a commission, charge you a fee just for the transaction. And if at the end of the fiscal year or the quarter, whenever they send you your report, if you've made just minimal, so long as they don't lose you money, right? Because they may not be in the business of predicting economic futures, of predicting economic health, right? But so long as they can secure you like a 1 to 3 to 5, I mean, sometimes they push it, right? If they're really good at their job, they're about the business, they're about the work, and looking out for your interests, they're making you money, right? But if they barely break even or just above it, not even enough to beat out inflation, they're going to chalk it up to like, well, you never know what the market's going to do, blah, 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 but we did what we could, and here are the trades that I did for you, and I kept us afloat, and all this other fucking bullshit. They make their money. They don't give a fuck whether you come up or not. They're coming up, right? So that's a conflict of interest. Conflict of interest because they benefit even when you don't. And they pair that with professional optimism, like, well, let's hang in there another year. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4.5. Hundreds of firms have cooked their books. According to the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, between January 1997 and March 2002, 689 companies, that's 10% of all publicly traded firms, restated their results. With the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of August 2002, CEOs are required to certify the accuracy of the reporting. The jury is out on whether this will make a difference. I think they meant to say that the jury is out whether this will make a difference. What's the term called? Retroactively. Whether or not they have to go back retroactively and sign off on all those cooked documents. If not, if they saw down the pipeline that this August 2002 ruling was coming down from the legislature, then what they would have done is between January 1997. So they had 5 years, almost a little more than 5 years to cook their books and file restatements that they didn't have to certify. Dog, everybody's in the fucking clear pretty much. Everybody done cooked their books and now appear to be doing everything above board because they don't have to go back and verify and sign and certify past statements. They already did it. So I don't know whether or not the Sarbanes-Oxley Act required CEOs to go back in the past, but for future statements, so the statements that come after 2002, they have to certify with their signature. Big whoop. Big fucking whoop. When all the money's been made already, now they're just nickel and diming everybody. Back then they're making money hand over motherfucking fist, and today they could just live off. They could just float. They could just float on nickel and diming you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. On top of the crises of major corporations from Adelphia to Xerox, Wall Street itself proved to be deeply complicit. Deeply complicit. Star analysts had knowingly recommended lemon stocks of customer firms. Brokers had routinely given clients, in parentheses, many of whom ultimately became exposed as engaged in corporate frauds of their own, they gave their clients special access to lucrative initial public offerings. I mean, what's new? What's fucking new, right? Shareholders, most of whom are also employees, are in deep crisis of trust, and for good reason. They are in a deep crisis of trust, and they got good reason to be. The next category are customers. Customers. Once upon a time, in the 1950s, consumers were only too happy to buy just about any good or service that came their way. Abundance, what John Kenneth Galbraith called the affluent society, abundance was a novel experience for Americans, and they embraced it with gusto. No more. Today, many industries and markets are battlegrounds where consumers and sellers wage battle in a fog of mutual mistrust. This problem is not universal. Great brands like Coca-Cola, IBM, Disney, and BMW retain their sheen despite ups and downs. But it's nasty down in the trenches. Hell yeah, I could attest to that. Martha Stewart's downfall is emblematic. The icon of the pastel-tinged family lifestyle, her message was trust at the highest level. Quote, "What I'm really giving," she has said, "is a reality that looks like a fantasy." And yet she was indicted for fraud, right? Ersatz, maybe. But her fantasy was how to articulate an aesthetic of caring into daily life. If not Martha, who? Ersatz, maybe. Ersatz, I want to say, ersatz, what's the definition of ersatz? Ersatz is going to be like a clinical, something not monotone, something not ethereal either. It's like a combination, something that seems surreal. So something that seems surreal, unattainable, and yet lifelike, right? At least that's the context that I'm picking up here. Ersatz, maybe, but her fantasy was how to articulate an aesthetic of caring into daily life. So if not Martha, who? What is the definition of ersatz?
Here's the definition of ersatz, of a product made or used as a substitute, typically an inferior one, for something else.
It says ersatz of a product. So it's describing a product. It's an adjective, and it's made or used as a substitute, typically an inferior one for something else. And the example was ersatz coffee. Okay, so I guess looking back, what they're being is reflective of Martha Stewart's past, and they say it's ersatz. Ersatz made or used as a substitute, typically an inferior one. So what, Martha Stewart was like the IKEA of our times? made or used as a substitute. And one could argue that if you're not going to get oak furniture, right? If you're not going to get some hardwood furniture, you're going to go get some of that particle board bullshit from IKEA, right? There you go. So it seems lifelike. It seems surreal, right? So like it gives you like the semblance of quality and not actually having it. All right. Increasingly, consumers depend on transparency to protect themselves and prepare for marketplace battle. In a 2001 survey by Environics International, 88% of Americans said they gather information about products before a major purchase. American consumers have high expectations of companies reporting on both their financial and social performance honestly. 85% and 78%, respectively, hold companies completely responsible for this degree of transparency. So 85% of folks want to see some financial transparency. 78% of folks hold companies to a standard for social performance transparency. Okay. 1 point here, a couple of points actually. First point. Consumers prepare for the car buying process with military precision. The internet provides, mostly for free, government crash test results, product reviews from a variety of perspectives, personal advice and consultation, and several versions of dealer pricing. One site offers dealer price comparisons by zip code. Point two, the travel industry's economics are beset by transparency. Internet's air and hotel bookings continue to increase. Analysts predict that in good times and bad, online bookings will push prices down. Point three, not only did Wall Street lose the confidence of consumers, but banking is also under pressure. Elone, a dot-com survivor, returned to television advertising and turned profitable in 2002. It ended the year with 13 billion in consumer loans on its books. Its site lives and breathes the transparency of its lending process. Oh yeah, folks are going into debt. Folks are taking loans out on their future success. Folks are taking loans out on their future paychecks, and some folks are struggling, man. I've heard of some folks in the business who had to turn quote unquote customers away because they began feeling bad, man. Like, yeah, it feels good to give loans, but I mean, when you see folks really in the fucking pits of despair, I don't know. Maybe you grow a conscience. Maybe you grow a heart. Maybe you grow a motherfucking brain. Point four, type, quote, insurance rates into a search engine and find all sorts of resources, from the Progressive Insurance Company to pure information sites like insurance.org that provide advice and comparative deals for your particular situation. Point five, the recording industry has been in crisis since MP3 took off in 1998. Because music is pure information, transparency in this case challenges a century-old business model and the corruption that comes with it. Point six, millions of Americans think the healthcare system misleads them. Tenet is but one example of a major provider that lost public trust. Tenet, the company, that lost public trust under suspicion of overcharging Medicare and conducting unnecessary operations. But damn, do we not hear more about that today? Like, that shit happens on a regular. Physicians and pharmaceutical companies seem to be in an unholy alliance, doing battle with a new mini industry in Canada that sells low-cost branded drugs and generics to U.S. patients via the internet. Pharmaceutical companies malign the integrity of Canadian exporters. GlaxoSmithKline even threatened to cut off their supplies. But elderly patients on fixed incomes know that this idea works. In the past, consumers were isolated. A few joined quaint consumer groups. Others talked to neighbors about products they might buy or read the main source of objective advice, Consumer Reports. Today, they self-organize. They get other readers' book reviews on Amazon from their home, workplace, or coffee shop, even from a screen in a competing bookstore, to learn what others think about a car, movie, music CD, just music, I guess, computer, camera, stereo, garden tool, home furnishing, office product, vacation destination, restaurant, wine, or perfume. They can consult numerous sites from eopinions.com. Access to information has created power struggles in many markets. Sellers see customers commoditizing them, going to Walmart and internet merchants to challenge their prices and profit margins, and ready to launch a class action lawsuit for the least provocation. Consumers see sellers ripping them off, providing bad service, and invading their privacy. Notable exceptions exist, but nastiness rules in many industries, especially big ticket ones like automobiles, travel, hotel, air, financial services, brokerages, banks, insurance, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, and telecommunications. Meanwhile, values-oriented activist consumers have agendas that go beyond personal benefit. They probe deep into a company's supply chain to expose I was gonna say international because it is international. Shit's conglomerate. They probe deep into a company's supply chain to expose environmental and human rights practices, then demand and force change. In 1996, they publicized the fact that Walmart's Kathy Lee Gifford celebrity collection of clothing was being stitched by Honduran children who often worked 24-hour shifts for wages as low as 31 cents an hour. Gifford broke into tears on national television when confronted by the evidence. The consumer reaction soon led not only Walmart, but also eventually Nike, Gap, Disney, and others to revise labor practices in their supply chains. It's only when they get exposed that the change comes, huh? The next category of shareholders, communities. In the mid 1990s, US big box retailer Home Depot would never have believed that a coalition of rainforest activists would force it to phase out old growth lumber from its product lines. Nike wouldn't have guessed that the factories used to produce its products, its goods, in distant countries would become vilified as sweatshops, spurring it to establish a code of conduct for global labor standards and a nonprofit partnership to help improve the lives and communities of offshore workers. Monsanto didn't foresee that it would grossly underestimate public fears about the safety of genetically engineered products, only to find itself committing to goals of dialogue and transparency around new products and technologies. These companies didn't understand the new power of citizens to look deeply into their operations and suffered as a result. In a transparent world with unprecedented access to information, employees, shareholders, business partners, and even to a degree, consumers want evidence that firms are trustworthy and behaving according to their values. These groups must still pry out the truth about a firm's actions and impacts. Events frequently occur behind closed doors. Stakeholders are bound by confidentiality or ignorance. Some people know where the bodies lie, and that information will stay hidden for shorter and shorter periods as the world becomes more connected. Is that it? Environics. I said this previously. Environics International has found that many people form impressions of individual companies based on social factors such as labor practices, business ethics, and environmental sustainability, sometimes ahead of product quality and value. In their most recent US survey, significant majorities held companies responsible for how they treat employees, environmental protection, human rights, and having the same high standards everywhere they operate. So, all right, I get it. I get it. Maybe they're cutting costs. They're being more efficient, more effective in areas where labor laws or environmental laws are more lax, right? But at the end of the day, it goes back. This is just a side comment. It goes back to creating better business, to creating good business practices, a business that's sustainable. Otherwise, you're just going to go from country to country, right? From jurisdiction to jurisdiction, burning the land, burning the water, burning the air. And you're going to be left with nothing. You're going to paint yourself into a fucking corner. And I mean, you might be rich at the end of it, but you're just as liable to get eaten up. You're a fucking nobody. That's a message to the 1%, I guess. I don't fucking know. Well, I do fucking know, but it's not just a message to the 1% because there's a ton of middle managers who let this shit happen, who actually perpetuate this shit. There's some middle managers who cause this shit to happen, and then they doctor those numbers and kick them up to their superiors, to their supervisors, to their executives, right? And it all looks copacetic when it's not. It's fucking it's corrupted. It's what's the term called? It's festering with bullshit, and it's just being covered up by middle management. It happens. It happens. I've been there. I've seen it. I didn't get a t-shirt from it. I almost got knocked off. Some stakeholders, community activists, non-governmental organizations, that's NGOs, and the like, have little or no direct power over the firm. Their main tool is transparency, the ability to learn, inform others, and organize on the basis of what they know. When community stakeholders use information to gain the support of others who do have the economic power, like the firm's customers, shareholders, or employees, their power multiplies. The complex and diverse community sphere includes several categories of stakeholders. First, it's communities themselves, of geography, from local to global, of identity, that's race, age, gender, nationality, etc., and of interest, shared beliefs or concerns. The second is independent organizations. Those are clubs, religious groups, business associations, lobby groups, political parties, community groups, and NGOs. Their philosophies and goals traverse the political spectrum from the National Rifle Association to Greenpeace. And the third is the media, whose contribution to transparency is central when they do a good job. Unfortunately, this is not always the case, even where the press is free. Welcome to 2023, right? Firms ignore at their peril the scrutiny and reactions of this complex array. Events like the Chernobyl nuclear meltdown, the Bhopal gas leak, that's from Union Carbide, go look it up, fucking Google that one time, the Brent Spar oil spill, that's Shell, and the Exxon Valdez oil spill taught firms that they can neither conceal nor evade the external impacts of their actions. Civil society is now organized in networks of NGOs which scrutinize and respond to the activities of firms around the world. NGOs span a range of activism from social to community service delivery to advocacy, including lobbying and civil disobedience. Some, like Transparency International, align with business and government agencies. Others, like the Independent Media Center, attack established institutions. Many also work in partnership with firms and governments to define and implement solutions that are socially, environmentally, and economically sustainable. Let me go back real quick. I think one sentence. I think I fucked up reading that somehow. Hold on. Civil society is now organized in networks of NGOs which scrutinize and respond to the activities of firms around the world. NGOs span a range of activism from social and community service delivery to advocacy, including lobbying and civil disobedience. No, I understood that. Okay. Continuing. Increasingly, NGOs operate globally, and nearly all of the internet. Hold on. Increasingly, NGOs operate globally, and nearly all use the internet to learn about corporate behavior, inform others, and organize. Dozens of firms like Shell, British Petroleum, Squibb, Chiquita, Ford, Hewlett-Packard, and General Motors now work closely with selected NGOs to achieve mutual transparency and alignment of interests and programs. All this occurs in the context of a heightened global consensus on the core issues of social development and the environment, which came into focus around the 2002 UN Summit on Sustainable Development. They include a little block quote here, which says, The shadows of environmental degradation, poverty, and lack of economic opportunity lie across the regions of the world that are fertile grounds for ethnic conflicts, hatred, and violence. The private sector has a more important role than ever before to develop products and practices and to support policies that protect and restore the environment, that eradicates poverty, and that creates a fair and transparent society. The challenge of the future is to choose a course that satisfies the market requirements for growth, maintains the natural balance that sustains our economies, and meets the needs and rights of global communities awakening to new dreams of health, prosperity, and peace. End block quote. Yeah, that shit sounds idealistic as fuck, but the UN is not doing that. Anyways, continuing, or the UN, I guess, isn't enforcing that, right? The UN is just this. What kind of bodies? It's not a regulatory body. It's a fucking peanut gallery. Okay. On any local activist can and does invoke this emerging consensus as the yardstick of a firm's actions and values. Because of transparency, market forces are increasingly brought to bear on the corporation. Firms compete for human capital in open labor markets. Mobility has never been greater. Firms compete for customers, never better informed, better connected, and more powerful. They compete for suppliers, distributors, and business partners as the business web becomes an open and ever shifting playing field. They compete for shareholders and institutional investors who draw on powerful tools and resources for X ray vision. And they compete in a global society for the hearts and minds of citizens and regulators who are increasingly plugged in, interconnected, and hunting for bear. Dog, we out here loaded for bear. You feel me? I may not be a citizen of every jurisdiction where conglomerates, where international organizations operate, but we're regulators. Corporate cowboys are the regulators. We create better business, and that shit starts from our corner of the earth, from what our hands can touch. You just gotta you have to be yo, you have you have to be the corporate you want to see or some shit like that. But what exactly do we mean by transparency? It's in italics. Transparency. What is something more than merely being information rich? A little subtitle says transparency defined. Transparency is information about an organization that is available to people or other organizations. But this statement begs a number of questions. Which other people or organizations get the information? For what purpose do they get it? What information do they get? In what form? In practice, transparency can mean many things. Since the Cold War, countries have sought transparency to verify compliance with arms control rules. That's gay. Ronald Reagan delighted in dunning USSR Premier Mikhail Gorbachev with the Russian proverb, trust but verify. In a very different context, a software design is said to be transparent if it is easy to see what a program does at a particular moment and what it will do next. In business, we hear about the need for transparency in corporate governance, executive compensation, and financial reporting. Transparency does not mean telling all about an institution or process. Shareholders of Kellogg Company need to separate signal from noise. Need to separate. Yeah. Shareholders of Kellogg Company need to separate signal from noise. They don't care, for example, how often the company puts out the garbage, but some may want to know about its recycling program. They need specific information to help them decide whether to add, keep, or sell Kellogg shares. They need transparency in such matters as sales, costs, executive compensation, and merger and acquisition plans. Kellogg customers make very different decisions. So the shareholders, the information, I guess, required by shareholders differs from information required from customers to be customers. Kellogg customers make very different decisions. They want information about taste and nutrition. I don't know if they want taste first. Come on, dog. Regulators like the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, need to know whether Kellogg's plants are sanitary and its products meet safety rules. They really do care about the garbage. In parentheses, it says, we hope, exclamation point. Oh, okay, we hope. FDA. Any of these may increasingly want to know about Kellogg's management ethics, sourcing, and environmental practices. Transparency, then, we define as the accessibility of information to stakeholders of institutions regarding matters that affect their interests. Yeah, I guess if we're personalizing the definition, if we're personalizing transparency as a definition, right? Transparency means being able to access that information or having access to that information that affects my personal interests. And so everyone ought to have that access in proportion to what their interests are. Transparency can be active or forced. Active transparency occurs when companies consciously decide to be transparent in order to achieve business goals. Formal reports, such as press releases, annual reports, and sustainability reports, are a vital link in the chain of active transparency, but they are not the whole story. Active transparency is part of everyday life. It occurs when a manager speaks to an employee and when an employee speaks to a colleague, a customer, a supplier, government, or community person. It is evidenced on websites, in advertising, at company events, and in media interviews, and in the actions, products, and services that a company produces every single day. Whenever the company and its people do anything, they communicate the company's priorities and values, for better or for worse. Open enterprises have the ability to ensure that active transparency in all its dimensions consistently reinforces their priorities and values. Forced transparency happens when transparency is done to corporations by stakeholders or the media. Kellogg has felt the impact of misalignment between the level of stakeholder activism and the firm's approach to transparency. And they include a figure 1.1. For several years, Greenpeace, I guess let me describe figure 1.1 because they don't really describe figure 1.1 here. Figure 1.1 is like a Cartesian graph of sorts. It's a graph with an x and a y axis. The y axis goes from low to high, right? Low is on the bottom, high is at the top, and that y axis is firm transparency, right? On the x axis, starting from lowest to highest, where low is on the left, right? So bottom left is low, low, and on the bottom right, you're moving to the low, high, right? So that will be low firm transparency on the y-axis and high stakeholder activism. That's what the x-axis is labeled, stakeholder activism. This whole figure is called transparency alignment. Transparency alignment. So how transparency aligns with stakeholder interest or activism, where the theory is that If you have, you can have, and there's possibilities here. You can have low firm transparency and low stakeholder activism, and they would be in what's called the mushroom category. There's 4 quadrants here. The mushroom category, that's low firm transparency, low stakeholder activism. High firm transparency and low stakeholder activism, so that's the top left quadrant, that would be the vanguard category, because you have high firm transparency and low stakeholder activism. To me, that signals that the stakeholders are very trusting of the firm, because the firm is really transparent. So there wouldn't be much stakeholder activism, right? It's the vanguard. To have high transparency and high stakeholder activism, that would be the trust category. So to me, that high levels of firm transparency evokes trust from their stakeholders, and to me, it sounds like there's a more trusting relationship between the two, where stakeholders can necessarily dictate the direction the firm goes in because of how transparent it is. Whether it's buying or selling shares, or the next step in which direction to take as far as social responsibility, let's say. Now, low firm transparency and high stakeholder activism, to me, it sounds like a lot of churn. There's a lot of churn going on. There's very little trust. And funny enough, that bottom right quadrant is labeled danger. So, Kellogg has felt the impact of misalignment between the level of stakeholder activism and the firm's approach to transparency. Refer to figure 1.1. For several years, Greenpeace and other environmental health-conscious groups claimed that Kellogg and one of its subsidiaries, Morningstar Farms, were distributing genetically modified foods. In 2000, Kellogg had announced that no genetically modified foods were being sold by Morningstar Farms. Yet Kellogg failed to engage with the environmental groups or to initiate any active process for rigorously addressing their concerns. And Greenpeace didn't believe the 2000 announcement. In the face of stakeholder activism, Kellogg became opaque. It occupied the danger zone, right? So there's a lot of stakeholder activism taking place, and Kellogg chose to be not transparent. They went opaque, right? So on March 8, 2001, Greenpeace announced that an independent lab had found Starlink corn, a genetically modified variety not approved for human consumption, in a Kellogg Morningstar corn dog. Greenpeace called on the FDA to order a recall and investigation. Its spokesperson said, Americans have asked Kellogg's over and over to stop this genetic experiment on our food, yet Kellogg refuses to listen and tries to mislead consumers. No one should trust the Kellogg's or Morningstar names again. Kellogg waited a few days, seeming to vacillate and further hurting its cause. Vacillate means to fucking flip-flop, to meander, to go back and forth, to hesitate, to waver. Kellogg waited a few days, seeming to vacillate and further hurting its cause. So it hurt its cause. Yeah, like you fucking hesitate. You look guilty, dog. Conducted a test of its own. Oh, beautiful. So it investigated itself, just like law enforcement. It investigated itself, just like the gov, just like the feds. It investigated itself and admitted the presence of Starlink and recalled the corn dog from retailers on March 13. Kellogg would have escaped this embarrassment if it had taken Kellogg would have escaped this embarrassment if it had taken the German poet Friedrich Schiller's advice. Quote, it is wise to disclose what cannot be concealed. To me, that sounds like logic. It's obvious. If you can't conceal something, it's already disclosed. Don't try to hide it. If it's unconcealable, you trying to hide it makes you look guilty. Continuing. When a firm is so focused on transparency and, quote, sustainable policies that it loses sight of the things that its stakeholders care about, it may enter the vanguard zone of our diagram, which brings its own costs. The vanguard zone, if you recall, is high firm transparency and low stakeholder activism. Low stakeholder activism, high firm transparency. So, when a firm is so focused on transparency and, quote, sustainable policies that it loses sight of the things that its stakeholders care about, it may enter the vanguard zone of our diagram, which brings its own costs. This happened with Iceland, a UK retail food chain that went bankrupt after converting its produce section to 100% organic foods. To rephrase the Panasonic commercial tagline with transparency, it's best to be, quote, just slightly ahead of your stakeholders. Patagonia, yeah, I mean, just slightly ahead. That way you can lead your stakeholders. Like if you just outright ignore your stakeholders may have trust that you're doing the right thing, but if you're doing the most, you're going to burn yourself out. If you have too ideal of dreams, I mean, if they're real, just real pipe dreams, like 100% organic foods, you know, if you don't have the resources, if you don't have the the resources or the network to actually see it through, you're going to drive a company into the ground. You're going to drive a company to bankruptcy, and you'll just become a martyr. You'll literally be placed on a T-shirt. Welcome to the streets. You'll just be on a T-shirt and you'll be remembered. R.I.P. Iceland, a UK retail food chain. All right. It was the first in its industry. Hold on. It says here, continuing. Okay, so to rephrase the Panasonic commercial tagline with transparency, it's best to be just slightly ahead of your stakeholders. So you lead your stakeholders. Don't fucking leave them behind. Don't leave them in the dust. Patagonia, an outdoor sports clothing and equipment manufacturer, illustrates how to succeed in the vanguard zone. It was the first in its industry to move to organic cotton clothing, leading customers and eventually competitors like Nike to buy into the idea. It was the first in its industry to move to organic cotton clothing, leading customers and eventually competitors like Nike to buy into the idea. In the process, Patagonia strengthened the differentiation of its brand and maintained its sales growth through the 2001-2002 economic turndown. Arguably, Enron was in the mushroom zone. Shareholders were kept in the dark and covered with manure. Through a flood of deceptive information about the company, Enron proffered glamour, a, quote, cool business model, Washington connections, and a skyrocketing share price. Apparent, but not real, transparency. Employees, trading partners, investors, media, and analysts bought it. Though some evidence of risk was there for those who knew how to read it, few noted it. A mushroom strategy can be disastrous because it shields firms from market forces that might otherwise correct their behavior. If Enron had been actively transparent about off-balance sheet financing, for example, stakeholders might have forced it to self-correct in time to avoid implosion. Was it the right balance? Consider British Telecom. It actively consults using a variety of structured mechanisms with a broad range of stakeholders, from suppliers to communities to shareholders in the United Kingdom and abroad. It seeks transparency in its daily operations, and is considered a world leader in the quality of its corporate reporting. An inhabitant of the trust zone, the company claims its social an inhabitant of the trust zone, the company claims that its social responsibility strategy contributes 25% of the image and reputation component of its customer satisfaction measures and provides a competitive advantage in the marketplace. Transparency cuts both ways. In a sense, the firm is a stakeholder of its stakeholders. We use the term reverse transparency to denote the ability of corporations to look into the actions of stakeholders. Reverse transparency, too, can be active or passive. When ethical mutual funds like Domini Investments and pension funds like CalPERS, their stakeholders, publish their proxy voting policies, investee firms, those are companies, gain visibility into what they might do in an upcoming board election. Typically, firms find out more today than ever before about their employees and, to varying degrees, their customers. As they increasingly face expectations from activist shareholders, NGOs, and community groups, firms seek transparency into these organizations. Sometimes this is a cloak and dagger operations. Other times, a public relations function. At their best, open enterprises find ways to authentically consult and collaborate with everyone. Oh, at their best, yeah, at their best. Ideally, at their best, you're collaborating, you're shaking hands with everybody and making good business happen. Otherwise, you're getting buried. Otherwise, you have to bury somebody else. And that rarely creates good business, results in healthy business relationships. Yeah, and you'll recognize that 2002, yeah, folks really weren't fucking with big data on the level that it is today, right? Big data. I mean, actually ripping folks' digital footprints and tracking them through their life, right? Domini Investments. Domini Investments. I'm not really sure what that mutual fund does, but nowadays, yeah, like they're buying data from places like Facebook, Instagram, Meta, if you will. They're buying data and they're mining it using their own forms of analysis, analytics, in order to target you that much better. That much better. Because I was gonna say that more effectively. Yeah, more effectively. They can target you with more precision, if you will. Sometimes this is a cloak and dagger operation. Other times, a public relations function. At their best, open enterprises find ways to authentically consult and collaborate with, in italics, everyone. Okay, transparency is by no means universal. Forces for opacity are fighting hard, but transparency is clearly on the rise. Another little subtitle here says, Drivers of Transparency. In the 21st century, I'm trying to enunciate all of my consonants, bear with me. In the 21st century, transparency and trust have become critical to the operation of organizations and economies for economic, technological, social, and socio-political reasons. First point here, the success of market economies and globalization. As market capitalism moves to a global scale, the competitive success of firms and nations depends on genuine performance. The crises of 1998 in East Asia and 2002 in the United States exposed the consequences of cronyism, corruption, and false reporting in both the private and public sectors. That's funny. It didn't put here the consequences of capitalism. It could be because capitalism never fails. It only fails when you introduce this bullshit like cronyism, corruption, and false reporting. Come on, don't drink the Kool-Aid. I mean the Kool-Aid that they hand out in public education, saying that capitalism bad, but you're reading out of a fucking textbook that was facilitated by capitalism, and then no, wait, that was enabled by capitalism and then just facilitated by cronyism because I forget who's the biggest publisher now. It could still be McGraw, but a lot of these fucking textbooks are bullshit. Second point, the rise of knowledge work and business webs. Firms' means of production exist in the crania of their employees and the resource of their business partners. Knowledge worker productivity depends on openness and candor regarding business and production matters, as well as trust, integrity, and values-based leadership. Point 3, the spread of communications technology. The internet, in particular, is ever more pervasive, granular, immediate, and impossible to control. It is the quintessential medium of transparency, archival completeness, creativity, innovation, business productivity, and self-organization, a technological challenge to traditional hierarchies. Point 4, demographics and the rise of the net generation. Someone once said that technology is anything that was invented before we were born. Today's children and young adults perceive the internet as part of everyday life, just like their parents saw television and their grandparents saw radio. In parallel, many have a stronger sense of civil values than did members of earlier generations. I don't know about a stronger sense of civil values. Some folks have become much more pathological about it. They cry out in pain while they strike you, if that makes any sense. They cry out in pain while they strike at you. Point 5. The rising global civil foundation. Crises, fanaticism, and uneven development from one country. Okay, let me just go back, I guess, to point 4. To point 4, I guess, hard times make hard niggas. Hard niggas make easy times. Easy times create soft niggas. And that's just circular all the way around. Soft niggas create hard times. Hard times create hard motherfuckers. Hard motherfuckers create good times. Good times create soft motherfuckers all over again. Point 5, the rising global civil foundation. Crises, fanaticism, and uneven developments from one country to the next cannot mask the fact that the world's ever, damn, there's a typo here. It's like a misprint. Crises, fanaticism, and uneven development from one country to the next cannot mask the fact that the world's ever more educated generations continually raise the standards for the quality of human interaction. Whether through law, precedent, or norms of interaction, it's becoming more and more difficult to get away with bad behavior. It's just becoming more and more difficult to deal with pansy motherfuckers. And then it says, none of these drivers is likely to disappear anytime soon. $1 says that it is. I bet you a fucking dollar. The next little subtitle says, economics, business webs, and knowledge work. Economic growth depends on trust. In the World Values Survey, people in 37 rich to poor market economies were asked whether they believe that, quote, most people can be trusted, or, quote, you can't be too careful in dealing with people. Trust levels, those who said most people can be trusted, varied from 5% in Peru to 61.2% in Norway. Researchers found a direct correlation between trust and national economic growth. In fact, high trust poor countries grew faster than both rich countries and low trust poor countries. In the industrial economy, what powered the engines of production, the fuel, was physical energy. That's coal, electricity, gasoline, and chemical reactions. Machines also needed grease to work smoothly rather than grind apart. Today's economy depends on knowledge, human intelligence, agility, and relationships inside and outside the firm. The fuel is information, and the lubricant is trust. The revolution in information and communications technologies is at the heart of these changes. The internet and other technologies enable thinking, communication, and collaboration like never before. Today's organizations require the ability to learn faster than their competitors and to compete one B web against another. One business web. Who the fuck says B web? One business web against another. You know what that fucking sounds like? Corporate war. And you're fucking in it. So wake up. Technologies, yeah, I'll repeat that sentence for you one more time. Today's organizations require the ability to learn faster than their competitors and to compete one business web against another. It's fucking corporate war, all right? You got networks battling each other. You have professionals hitting each other up. I mean, and you could call it competition. Sometimes these motherfuckers act like opposition because they can't see through the bullshit. They don't recognize good business when they see it. And they get downed. Sometimes they get dropped, terminated. They get promoted to customer, if you will. or demoted from life. Technologies, products, even entire strategies can be copied. Competitive advantage is ephemeral as firms constantly seek new ways to create value. Survival and success hinge on the knowledge and creativity of product strategists, developers, and marketers. And they also hinge on sustained, trusting relationships with many different stakeholders across the B web and beyond, across the business web and beyond. Yeah, that's where your reputation precedes you. If you have to go outside of your business web, if you have to continue incorporating other associates, you have to initiate contact, introduce yourself, create rapport, you become a hustler. You're a corporate cowboy, right? Corporations don't do that. Individuals do. A corporation doesn't have a fucking face. The folks in public relations do, right? Your PR people or any representative you send, that's your face. So you better be dead sure. You better be dead certain that the folks that you send are looking out for your best interests as much as they are looking out for their personal best interests. They should be looking out for everybody's relative interests when it comes to business. If they don't, expect blood. Brains require motivation to perform. You can turn up the speed on an assembly line, but you can't set a quota on bright ideas or the fruits of engagement. False. Actually, I'm going to stop commenting just for a little bit, but that's false. That's fucking false. If you're a shit leader, yeah, no, you can't set a quota. But if you're a competent leader, fucking good ideas are abound. That just goes back to motivation, to actually facilitating and enabling, empowering your associates to take action. Money is not the only motivation for today's employee or market partner. I'm going to stop commenting. Money is not the only motivation for today's employee or market partner. Motivation also depends on intrinsic value and fulfillment, continuity of relationships, dignity and respect, meeting commitments, and mutual trust. The need for transparency and trust in a knowledge economy seems self-evident. When knowledge is the basis of productive activity, the firm must make it readily available. This pushes the door ajar. By definition, productivity depends on having the right knowledge at the right place and time in a useful form. The knowledge must be true, accurate, and up to date. We see this focus on knowledge enablement and deployment in everything from use of the internet as a collaborative tool to just in time production and real time accounting systems to enterprise risk management. In a world of interdependent business webs, see, now they say business webs. Well, what the fuck happened to B webs? This shit got played out quick, huh? In a world of interdependent business webs, such systems extend beyond the enterprise to its suppliers, distribution channels, and customers. Employees who are self motivated will perform best, not just when they have the knowledge that they need, but also when they have a sense of dignity and self worth. Mutual trust with their employers that is based on ethical values practiced every day. Again, the only basis for such trust is transparency, as human resources professionals say, open, honest, and direct communication. Simply put, organizations that wish to sustain high performance in the knowledge economy have no choice but to create an environment of trust founded in transparency. Next little subtitle. Next subtitle is Technology, Media, and the Internet. The pervasiveness of the broadcast media alone creates a culture of transparency. People expect that they can know anything instantaneously. We are bathed in broadcast news and information from global to local interest, from personal to economic to political. TV screens are in every restaurant and airport gate, elevator, or even corporate office, and even corporate office. 100 channels and growing, with technologies like TiVo ready to time shift at our pleasure. In case we missed the TV clip or print article, we can go to the internet and catch up on the newspaper, TV channel, or financial information service of our choice. Too much of it is one-dimensional. Too much of it is one-dimensional. Merchandising the crisis of the week with the received editorial perspective, especially when national wars dominate headlines, and with little meaningful differentiation in points of view from one channel or commentator to the next. But alternative points of view do seep through, easy to find for those who care to look. Yeah, alternative media exists, but and this book isn't downing alternative media, but nowadays, mainstream media downs alternative media all the time. This is early 2023. Early 2023, supposedly there was a recession coming our way, right? Because we chose we chose to change the definition, the legal and real definition of recession via Wikipedia, and it's not like we're already in the bitch. It's supposedly headed towards us as we speak. It's not like we're already fucking in that shit. The internet raises transparency to a whole new level. Broadcast media are one way, centrally and corporately controlled. Single message. They are one way, centrally and corporately controlled, single message. The multi-directional internet is the opposite of all of these. Anyone can use it to originate messages from any location, anytime. You can find any points of view you want if you care to look, and no one controls its content, except for all its users. The internet, as the saying goes, routes itself around obstacles. That's in quotes. It routes itself around obstacles. It's virtually impossible to block it. The net has boundless versatility. Simple person-to-person communications fancy and complex informational websites, the instant personal soapboxes known as web blogs, they're just blogs and vlogs. Real-time activity coordination from business, personal, political, financial transactions, information capture, long-term archiving, the list goes on. All these are new and powerful tools for transparency. By the internet, we mean more than just the World Wide Web. It extends from weblogs and email to mobile phones and handheld computers and just out of the gates cameras in our mobile phones. Damn, yeah, this is 2002. Cameras were barely put on mobile phones, on cell phones. Wireless communicators for specialties like healthcare, education, security, and gaming, and communicating chips embedded in everything from running shoes to soup cans to door handles, production lines, and prosthetics. Using commercial remote sensing satellites, anyone with a few $100s can buy detailed images of any spot on the planet. Surveillance cameras are everywhere. You can't take a half-hour walk in downtown New York or London without having your picture taken 200 times. What? A half-hour walk in New York or London. And what's funny is now it's 2023, right? We could imagine that number has gone up. And I would say significantly, substantially. It's gone up substantially. If not a picture taken 200 times in a half-hour walk, imagine 300 times in a half-hour walk. Imagine 200 times in a 15-minute walk, right? And yet so much fucking crime goes unsolved. Anyways, individuals, and yet priorities are so fucked up in these crime-ridden cities, especially New York and London. Individuals have them too. Cameras that communicate with the mobile internet are becoming commonplace. I mean, today's day and age, that shit's fucking standard. Motherfuckers go live on what? On the regular. They just start streaming live on the regular. When shit's going down, they're recording felonies on phones. They're just streaming them committing. They're streaming themselves committing felonies, streaming themselves breaking the law. And this is everybody, not just the regular people. People, police, government employees. Nobody's fucking safe from the fuckery. The internet empowers individuals and grassroots groups to learn, inform others, and organize like no other medium. The search engine Google, that's in parentheses, see the greatest show on planet Earth, sidebar, page 30. Page 30. Oh, that's the next page. I'll read it. And others, the search engine Google and others like it are among the greatest forces for transparency in the world today. Type just about any search term and you are bound to find what you need to know, as well as any dissensions or debates that pertain to the topic. Yeah, it's called doing research and viewing topics holistically, objectively, getting information from both sides, the pros and the cons. But that knowledge isn't too much commonplace anymore because folks don't want alternative media sources. It's not that folks don't want, it's that motherfuckers are lazy to use these alternative media sources, and instead they're getting their brains pumped. They're getting their brains pumped by the algorithm and the deciders up top, who just spew opinion and then expect you to follow suit, expect you to toe the line like sheep, I guess. Type in just about any search term and you are bound to find what you need to know, as well as any dissensions or debates that pertain to that topic. Okay. The Seattle protest from November 29 to December 3, 1999 against the World Trade Organization, remember that, set a benchmark for use of the internet to change the dynamics of transparency and dissent. It was a first in many respects. The breadth of its use of the internet, its coalition that ranged from trade unionists to environmentalists, anti-corporate globalists, and third world indigenous people, the extent to which it galvanized a new generation of youth, and how the official delegations in hotels and conference rooms felt obliged to deal with the people in the streets. It was also the first time since the 1960s that an international diplomatic meeting had raised such a ruckus on U.S. soil. Damn, nobody died? I mean, nobody got dragged out and fucking tarred and feathered? That's crazy. Let me just go back up real quick. It says here, anti-corporate globalists. Anti-corporate globalists? How the fuck do you do that? All right, go Google that shit. Anti-corporate globalists. All right. The internet was at the center of the protests. Protesters made extensive use of email and discussion boards, virtual sit-ins, web-based information and counter-information, and audio and video broadcasting. Under the code N30, that's November 30, organizers rallied a series of actions via the internet. The site, in quotes, a global day of action, published a call to arms in 10 languages and provided a directory of local contacts all over the world. Seattle also gave birth to the now permanent Independent Media Center, that's IMC, established by various independent and alternative media organizations and activists. The Center disintermediate mainstream journalists who quickly came to rely on it. It's the censor that disintermediate mainstream journalists came to rely on. Okay. What is disintermediate? Is that like ultra centrist? Center disintermediate? Center disintermediate. Let me look that up for you real quick. Don't mind me. What is the definition of disintermediate? What is the definition of disintermediate?
According to Wikipedia, disintermediation is the removal of intermediaries in economics from a supply chain, or cutting out the middlemen in connection with a transaction or a series of transactions.
Cutting out the middleman. So really it's just the center disintermediate mainstream journalists. So they're like ultra centrists. They're self-righteous centrists. Let's put it that way, I guess. They think they're cutting out the middlemen, and yet they've become the middlemen. Okay, yeah, self-righteous centrists, the ones who become middlemen, right? Shit, we've all been there. We can relate, but I'm definitely not empathizing, not sympathizing. The IMC websites became a key source of up-to-the-minute reports, photos, audio, and video. IMC produced 5 video documentaries uplinked to satellites and distributed to public access stations across the United States. It claims to have logged more than 2 million hits during the protest. This is not to say that all communication brings clarity. If anything, the protesters were opaque. Ordinary citizens were not plugged in. They had trouble understanding what the protesters wanted, and indeed, a variety of agendas were at play. How do they know that the protesters were opaque? How do they know that ordinary citizens were not plugged in? You feel me? When you have controlled opposition, when you're in a position to be working for the World Trade Organization, to be working for IMF, for the Trilaterals, for the Bilderbergs, dog, you control media. Alternative too. You can pay alternative media to publish whatever the fuck. You can give them the quote inside scoop and just feed them disinformation and misinformation. So everybody's unplugged, right? It's just muddying the water. More smoke, more mirrors. More smoke, more screens. All right. Yet Seattle was proof positive of the power of the internet as a mechanism that enables stakeholders to find out what is going on, inform others, and self-organize to advance their interests. Another little subtitle, it says Demographics, the power of the net generation. Another powerful force for transparency is the so-called baby boom echo, or as we have dubbed them, the net generation. Between the ages of 6 and 26, these are the children of the boomers. This generation is bigger than the boom itself, 80 million strong in the United States alone. And through sheer demographic muscle, they will dominate the 21st century. But this is also the first generation to come of age in the digital age. They are growing up bathed in bits. The vast majority of North American adolescents know how to use a computer, and almost 90% of teenagers in the United States use the net. They watch less TV than their parents as time online takes away from television. This generation has an outlook on life different from their parents. It is always tricky making generalizations about an entire generation, as they are divided by gender, class, race, geography, psychographic characteristics, and other important factors. Nevertheless, some themes characterize a majority of this demographic group. Rather than be passive recipients of television, 24 hours per week for their boomer parents, they spend more time online. Searching, reading, scrutinizing, authenticating, collaborating, and organizing. Everything from MP3 files to social parties and political protests. The internet makes life an ongoing, massive multimedia research project, and the kids love it. They typically can't imagine a life where citizens don't have tools to constantly think critically, exchange views, challenge, authenticate, verify, or debunk. They have unprecedented access to information, and they are more knowledgeable than any previous generation. And with so much false or misleading information in the digital world, they develop good authentication techniques at an early age. I mean, some do. Some do. Other people are still fucking retarded. While they have greater self-confidence than did their parents at the same age, they worry about the future. It's not their own abilities that they are insecure about. It's the adult world and how it may lack opportunity. They also mistrust governments and elites. Gee, I wonder why. It's because they grew up in fucking 2002 with all this bullshit taking place, and they have this skill for authentication. They can see through the bullshit at a young age, and so they grow up disillusioned adolescents and adults. Yo, this book eats itself. Anyways, this generation tends to value individual rights, the right to be left alone, the right to privacy, and the right to have and express their own views. As they enter adolescence and later, they tend to oppose censorship by governments and by parents. They also want to be treated fairly. There is a strong ethos among many that, for example, in quotes, I should share in the wealth I create. That's cute. Many have a strong sense of the common good and of collective social and civic responsibility. Fucking relax with the collective thinking, bro. Relax with the collectionism. That shit is too much of that is idealistic, and it always leads to starvation and death. This generation wants options. Availability of choice is a deeply held value. The marketer's mantra should be give them options to buy their loyalty. I like that. I actually do like that. Give them options to buy their loyalty. You give folks options and opportunity to exercise those options, and you'll have them. You'll have their loyalty. Having grown up in a free and interactive world, artificial constraints are foreign. Even with a product as mundane as light bulbs, The net generation consumers want information and choice regarding environmental/energy use, tone, wattage, and brand. They resent it if this information is not readily accessible. This attitude derives from surfing in a world of seemingly limitless choice. They want to change their minds. Video games and the net are environments in which mistakes can be immediately corrected and situations recreated. When your video game hero runs out of life because of a motor skill mistake, you just flip the reset button. A link to the wrong website is easily corrected with the click of the back button. Damn, that kind of rhymed. Reset button, well, back button. It's fucking rhyming buttons, Alex, relax. Not only, well, got stimulated real quick. Not only do they expect mistakes to be easily corrected, they want to be able to change their minds. In the words of singer/songwriter Shania Twain, changed my mind 1,000 times. I don't remember that song. Marketers should echo what she goes on to sing. Hey, I like it that way. Sounds like, is that NSYNC? As this generation enters the workforce and marketplace in developed countries, they will be a force of transparency, a force for transparency. The evidence is strong that they will scrutinize firms and other institutions like never before. They will demand choice, authenticity, and value. Once they find out something important, they have at their fingertips the most powerful tool ever for informing others and organizing. The next little subtitle here is Socio-Political Changes. The Rising Global Civil Foundation. Damn, it sounds... Around the world, the quote, civil foundation, as Roger Martin has called it, is on the rise. People living and working in their communities keep adopting ever higher standards of expectations, norms, customs, and laws that regulate, whether formally or informally, the behavior of corporations toward stakeholders. Slave labor may be okay on the Ivory Coast, but don't let your company be found using it. In the United States and Canada, the civil foundation is much higher today than even 25 years ago. Rules now cover a huge variety of activities and practices such as discrimination, smoking on the job, and sexual harassment. Many parts of the civil foundation, such as shareholder disclosure, environmental care, intellectual property rights, and consumer protection, include rules and norms that force companies to be more transparent. In many European countries, the United Kingdom, Scandinavia, France, and Germany, standards are even higher. In most rich capitalist countries, the civil foundation provides a sturdy platform for those who wish to raise standards even further. A high civil foundation signifies a society's high integrity and values, and therefore implies that business success depends more on actual performance and genuine trust than on backroom dealings. Trust, as we have already said, is a good predictor of national economic success. So countries with a high civil foundation are most likely to enjoy higher than per capita GPN growth. Higher per capita. I said higher than, huh? Trust, as we have already said, is a good predictor of national economic success. So countries with a high civil foundation are most likely to enjoy higher per capita GNP growth. That's gross national product. Increasingly, people on all continents peer into Western businesses skeptically, hoping for fair and equitable treatment to the standard of the rising global civil foundation. The saga of basmati rice is a case in point. This national treasure had been a community resource for several regions of India for hundreds of years. The breed was not static. It evolved in the hands of farmers through personal trading, hybridization, and natural and human selection. It took off in global markets, and soon global agribusiness took note. Basmati, along with a wide variety of other indigenous agricultural products, was the target of patenting rules being lobbied to the World Trade Organization at the instigation of U.S. firms in the early 1990s. Oh, I guess yeah, they say at the instigation of U.S. firms, but yeah, I mean they're being lobbied, they're being pressured by the World Trade Organization to put a patent on these things. I guess to take it out of Indian farmers' hands or some shit. Oh, and yeah, the next sentence says Indian farmers took notice. It says if these rules were passed, foreign corporations would control the core intellectual property of an Indian national resource, and Indian farmers took notice. Yeah, he's fucking cocksuckers, bro. Sometimes corporate can be some shady, grimy motherfuckers, man. Let me tell you, I seen it. I lived it. On October 2, 1993, 500,000 Indian farmers joined a day-long procession in Bangalore to protest the proposed rules, accusing Cargill, the world's largest agribusiness, of biopiracy. A group of protesters ransacked one of its facilities. The demonstrators pledged to protect sovereignty over our seeds, with a program to support the free exchange of seeds among farmers, along with the protection and development of community intellectual property rights. In 1995, the WTO, that's the World Trade Organization, went ahead and adopted rules that called on countries to patent their native seeds. This is so retarded. even even in 2023, this 2002 book is giving me feelings. Such measures could then provide a basis for commercial exploitation by multinationals who would sell the patented seeds back to local farmers and genetically engineer new strains on top of the original patents. Essentially, it was a legal framework to facilitate handing over indigenous intellectual property shared in community commons to corporations. In the midst of this battle, RiceTech, a small Texas company, filed 20 U.S. patent claims that covered natural basmati rice, the name basmati itself, and 3 unique strains that it had developed. One was, and still is, retailed as Texmati. Under these patents, RiceTech would own, in quotes, own India's indigenous strains of basmati rice. Indian exporters could then theoretically have been forced to pay RiceTech for the right to sell their produce in the United States, as well as license fees to use the name basmati. This resulted in a huge international furor. A massive outcry in the Indian media, barely a peep in the United States, however, and broad support from a variety of mostly European and Indian NGOs. The Indian government, which presented a counter case to the US Patent Office, and even India's arch rival, the government of Pakistan, where basmati is also an important crop. The U.S. Patent Office made its ruling in August 2001. A RiceTech spokesperson described it as a Solomon type result. Solomon. The company withdrew some of its broad claims, and the Patent Office threw out the rest. It did, however, grant RiceTech patents to Texmati and 2 other hybrids. It also ruled the name basmati a generic term rather than one that's, like champagne, is reserved for a place of origin. In other words, U.S. growers and seed manufacturers could use the name basmati if they wished. The resulting uproar in India, as all along, was heavily debated in Parliament and the national press. The government claimed victory, but others weren't so sure. This is one example of how the rise of global trade and institutions like the WTO create new kinds of pressures. Transparency cuts many ways. It provides information and ideas to cloners like RiceTech who seek new kinds of monopolies. Their strategy? Use global legal processes to privatize or render opaque what for centuries has been a transparent indigenous commons. Has been in transparent indigenous commons. What used to be common knowledge, they now want to patent it, like they fucking did something about it, right? But transparency also enables these communities to defend their interests. The new arrangements remained to be worked out. And at time of writing, the uncertainties of this global battle loom larger than ever. So yeah, keep in mind, that shit's 2002. This book is written in 2002 and it's now 2023 and it's a fucking corporate world order, baby. Let me tell you, it's a corporate war. That shit is it's hot in some places and it's cold in others, right? Fusion, the next subtitle. The next subtitle is Fusion of Economics, Technology, and Socio-Political Changes. The economic, technological, and socio-political are converging in emerging economies. In many countries, these changes will happen quickly, while the digital divide between haves and have-nots will not be filled completely. The growth of information and communications technologies in emerging economies will change the balance of power. Some indications of where this is going are, point one, by 2001, the pace of internet expansion in the United States had slowed down to 15%, while it was 36% in Latin America and 46% in Asia and Africa. In the same year, the number of internet users in Asia surpassed those in Europe and North America for the first time. Take note, that's 2001. 2001, Asia's fucking making moves out here. In 2001, China had as many internet users, 34 million, as all of Africa and Latin America combined, and more than the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand together. It had 1/4 as many internet users as the United States. And now, who the fuck knows? It's 2023. China's making moves, fam. Asia's making moves, fam. For all we know, there's backroom deals taking place that we don't fucking know about, and you don't need many internet users to do that. Point three, mobile telephones, that's cell phones, have outpaced fixed line telephones in developing countries. Expect the same for the mobile internet. Yeah, now that's true. Folks got tablets, got notepads, got cell phones that they're using in place of laptops even. Laptops are being phased out in some places, right? Folks are becoming more and more mobile, more and more agile, compartmentalizing more areas of their life into smaller, easier to carry, everyday carry kits, knives and guns included. Point three, mobile phones. Oh, mobile phones are the same. China has the largest number of mobile telephone subscribers in the world, 170 million in mid-2002, and is projected to have over 400 million by the middle of the decade. This was 2005. That was their projection, 400 million by 2005. Latin America is forecast to have 50 million mobile internet users by 2005. Point four, short message service, that's SMS, allows people to send and receive text messages via their mobile phones. In Singapore, China, and the Philippines, half of all telephone users utilize SMS more than once a day. In January 2001, thousands of Filipinos, unhappy with the corrupt government of President Joseph Estrada, took to the streets and forced him to resign. Forced him? How do you fucking force him? Gun to the head? How do you force somebody to? SMS played a key role in stimulating and organizing the protests. First, it was used to send political jokes. Then, users spread the word on demonstration sites. Damn. And 2023, we're fighting tyranny with memes. Imagine that. Imagine when like bullets actually come out. Imagine when somebody starts 3D printing shells. I wonder how that'll look like. 1, 2, 3, 4. Point 5. Much internet commerce in developing countries will be mobile, including micropayments, financial services, information services, and business services like logistics and customer relationship management. Point 6. In the year 2000, developing countries originated 36% of the world's exports of information technology products, mainly due to the outsourcing of manufacturing by global corporations. Yeah, like fucking chips and boards and circuitry. That's all being outsourced. The value of IT exports from developing countries now exceeds the total value of their agriculture, textile, and clothing exports. China, Korea, and several other countries are now building homegrown IT product companies which increasingly compete in global markets. Yeah, dog. Look at Japan now. Fucking Samsung is murdering the game. Several companies, such as India, Pakistan, the Philippines, and Malaysia, are global exporters of software and services. Major information, and I mean, look at Korea too, right? Fucking China, Korea, their house companies, their in-house companies are on par pretty much, and one would think, had a higher, a greater barrier to entry in the marketplace, but nah, man, they overcame, they adapted, and now they're fucking thriving. Major information and communications technologies firms, including Hewlett-Packard, IBM, Microsoft, and Motorola, have invested tens, even hundreds of millions of dollars to build their own capabilities in countries like China and India. That's nothing fucking new. Outsourcing manufacturing and actually going out and investing in plants in these that's not fucking new. Anyways, I guess this is a 2002 book, right? Maybe it is new for them. I'm over here reading the past. They all want to participate as sellers in these markets as the opportunities mature. As emerging economic firms and citizens become integrated into the global economy, they will perforce learn to live with pressure for transparency in their business practices. They will also increasingly expect and gain the ability to demand visibility into Western firms' business practices and monitor any Western government's preferential support for these business practices. Just a side comment, why the fuck can't we be skeptical of Eastern companies? Why don't you go ahead and Google who puts out more CO2 in the environment? Go ahead, take a break now, you listener, you reader. Take a break, go Google that shit. Who puts out more greenhouse gases? The US or somebody else? They will also increasingly expect and gain the ability to demand visibility into Western firms' business practices and monitor any Western government's preferential supports for these business practices. Both emerging economy and Western firms will be under increasing pressure to practice what they preach about open trade and level playing fields, as well as to behave responsibly toward people and the environment. Again, I challenge you. Go Google who the fuck produces more pollution, the US or somebody else. Technology and economic participation will strengthen the visibility, the market clout, and moral power of such demands. The tale about basmati rice illustrates that transparency and trust have their limits and their opponents. We take a close look at these issues in Chapter 2. And I didn't read from page 30. I didn't read the what's called the greatest show on planet Earth. It was recommended to us here. So I'll go ahead and read through that real quick. It's in a gray box on page 30. It says, the greatest show on planet Earth. It's like a little side mission, little side quest, I guess. The lobby of the Googleplex in Silicon Valley is a humble place. There is a piano that a number of employees play from time to time, the usual awards cabinet, a collection of lava lamps, and a video game system. It sounds like, anyways. I would have a gun range in mind, but amid the bustle is a sample of real-time Google queries scrolling on the wall behind the receptionist. People gawk at them like NASDAQ electronic tickers during the bull market. Essentially, just like a live feed of Google searches in real time is being displayed behind the receptionist. So like folks looking up like, what does a hold on. What's something I told y'all to Google earlier? What is a disintermediary? What is a center disintermediation? Another Google, who puts out more greenhouse gas than the US? All right. And it continues. It says, the depth, breadth, and variety of Google searches is astounding. At any point in time, people might be using the search engine to research a book on transparency. Check out tonight's dates. Get the scoop on Exxon's environmental record. Locate a view of Mars through the Hubble telescope. Choose a holiday recipe or seek help for a child's medical problem. Not to mention multimedia delights for all appetites, healthy and decadent. I mean, this is really well worded. It's not saying healthy and degenerate. It's healthy and decadent. We have been astounded at how easy it is to type in a couple of leading keywords and just about any company name to discover dirt that we didn't know. With 800 employees and a network of over 10,000 servers around the world, Google has become a universal engine of transparency. The greatest show on earth. It's still just a show. I like how they put has become transparent and yet the greatest show on earth. It's entertaining. It's entertaining because Google has done a lot of dirt too. And they've covered up a ton of dirt also. I mean, it doesn't make them a good or a bad player. They've got good and bad people. Google is just a fucking tool. Google doesn't have a face. Google doesn't have flesh and blood. It has people that do that for them. We have been astounded with how easy it is to type a leading couple with 800 employees, 10,000 servers, and on a typical day, it fields over 200 million queries in 88 languages, tracking over 3 billion web pages. Yeah, I mean, that's machine learning for you. Nothing crazy. I mean, well, it's 2023. I guess it was crazy in 2002. But that is the end of chapter 1. Thank you very much for joining me. My name is Alex, your host of this Corporate Cowboys Podcast episode, having read the first chapter of The Naked Corporation, How the Age of Transparency Will Revolutionize Business. But, it's from 2002, and transparency has become a lot more of a game. Some motherfuckers don't know how to play. And some motherfuckers just cheat, right? Take care of yourselves. Have a great one. I'll catch you next time for chapter 2.